welcome to the first episode of We4 Talk. Thank you for accepting our invitation. You've come from close and far, and you also accepted our invitation to bring something to share with us here, which exemplifies the topic of this episode, which is choice. And Piotr, maybe I can invite you because I'm already seeing your gift that you're sharing with us here to show us what you brought.
Since I'm a writer, I brought a book. It's a book called Travels with Herodot, written by a Polish reporter Ryszard Kapuściński. And the reason I brought it is basically that book somehow inspired me to write the first novel that I wrote, which was for me a completely new experience because historically I was doing something very different. And then somehow suddenly started to write. Kind of that time more or less make a choice to change fundamentally what I was doing and move from the business to writing. And that's basically the symbol of that somehow.
I'm just curious, what in particular inspired you? Do you remember a passage, a feeling? Because that was quite a bold choice you made, right?
Yeah.
So it must have been a powerful trigger.
Yeah. Well, just to clarify, I never was actually good in literature. Contained the story that probably my teacher at and secondary school literature teacher would be very surprised with the fact that I'm writing right now. I was kind of getting average scores in Polish, which was Polish literature at school, never really writing. And I spent more than 15 years in business career. But something that I was doing back in school and then in student time and later on was always figuring out stories and carrying the stories in my head for actually long months. It was like one story that I was able to kind of figure out and repeat myself for a number of months, and sometimes actually one specific scene, one moment, really kind of thinking through for a week, for example, the very high level of detail, which was more or less level of detail that is required to write, I guess, whether it's a non-fiction or fiction book, if you have some situations. But the actual trigger probably was some years ago, like 7 or 8 years ago. My parents actually passed away in a very short time frame, more or less in 2 months. Both of them died, yes, and that was probably some sort of a trigger for me to think things through. I'm a very introverted person in general, so rather keeping emotions inside, and somehow probably that moment, one of those stories that I had in mind, which was actually developed based on that book. Which I kind of figured out when I was traveling to my parents, which were living in a different city, just before they passed away. I somehow thought, maybe I'm going to translate it and put it in paper. And that was more or less the trigger to start writing. Mm-hmm. And somehow, develop into a habit. It turned out some people read it that are not my family and relatives, so they are more objective. And somehow commented that it's not so bad, and that's how, the whole idea.
So you think that basically the choices or the decision-making process is depending on the time that the most decisions are taken at precise trigger? Because I think that it's kind of like a long process. It doesn't take me to leave, let's say, the business. It didn't take me 1 minute that now I decided to leave, but it was like a long process, which was developing drop by drop until the glass was full and water comes out.
Maybe I see a difference between change and choice. Change, I see something as something long and incremental, exactly as you describe, until something's boiling over. And then the actual moment of decision making, at least for me, the difficult choices that I've made, in the end, it was actually quite simple. And all I needed was maybe that final trigger.
How long does it take, the deliberation part or something? Because sometimes it just, I can imagine, I have this really voluntaristic kind of imagination about choice that that you just have like an intuition or like like one sentence actually from usually when I write articles, I sometimes just have one sentence which is like sounds really beautiful. I like it very much, but other than that sentence, there's nothing. And then you just kind of start doing it, and then it just builds up. But you don't have any conception of what you do, and probably it's kind of similar with turning this kind of big change of like from going from business to literature. You didn't have like a very
Not
secure.
really. No, definitely not. And I think this is. I mean, I think it's very personal. I mean, you cannot generalize on how people are making the choices and the changes, but at least in my case, I'm a very rational person and very analytical, you know, in what I was doing. But in making personal choices or professional choices, actually I was very emotional. Maybe not emotional in terms of that I make a change day after day. Today I'm going to leave and tomorrow I'm leaving. But the reasons were, you know, emotional. I mean, very much, you know, when I recognize the moment when I'm not really engaged and, you know, passionate about what I was doing, but it was a place of work or type of work, that was really a trigger to say, okay, I mean, it's really time to, you know, to change and do something else and something different. Even if I didn't know, you know, what I'm going to do exactly, or whether it's, you know, secure and is going to really, you know, be successful or just reasonable. Yeah?
I agree. It's like kind of gut feeling than
Exactly.
rational analyze.
Let's say if you were in a similar situation with a similar change, not 4 or 5 years ago when you actually made it, but 15 years ago, would you have made different choices? Or
I guess, because I mean, that time, first of all, I had the, you know, the passion was different. Yes, I mean, I actually, you know, liked very much what I was doing before. So, you know, I was for a number of years consultant, then a, you know, senior manager in the companies, and actually I liked it very much. Yes, so that was what was driving me. I think the issue is that, you know, people frequently are not making the choices. Even either because really, you know, the other option is not, you know, really this deep passion that they feel, because I think frequently people are kind of complaining that they would like to do something else, but it's more like in the spirit of, you know, the grass is greener outside, yes, not really, you know, that much of true passion, yes, or they are not willing to take the risk, yes. So obviously one of the prerequisites is that to really have a, I think, a strong conviction that something else is really what, you know, is driving you. But secondly, is also the ability to take risk, whether it's could be, you know, financial, could be, you know, career, in terms of, you know, whatever ambitions and something. You leave place or area where, you know, you had a success and position built, for example, and you enter something completely different, and there's a risk, you know, whether you are going to succeed or not, yes, or being recognized. So I think those two I see as those prerequisites to really make a change. So really strong passion for something else, and secondly, the willingness to accept the risk that may not.
so a certain degree of empowerment and courage is required for you.
I guess so. Yeah.
I would say it goes to like family roots and what is your background, because if you grew up in this kind of family, it may be different than if you are grown in let's say US. So even the origin or basically where you were born, it matters a lot, and then your access to certain people, certain knowledge, it influenced quite a lot.
So what did you bring us?
I made a cube. It basically gives you the simple answers to questions yes and no. And then I think it took me quite a lot of time, maybe 35 years, to realize that basically there is no simple answer. And decisions has to be made by your own. And so I just bring it to show you.
To destroy
it. And it took me a long time that all the decisions I made were kind of that I discuss it with somebody, and I was okay. How it feels to you, or how it looks in your eyes, like if I would make this decision. So I was curious rather about what the other people think than what I think actually.
I see.
So and maybe it goes back what I was talking about, that basically my parents came from village and they basically have just the basic education. My career path was maybe a bit longer than it would be normally. So I have to go that path by my own. But I was always rather like wondering what the other people think of myself, what I am doing. And then I realized, okay, but it's not about them, it's about myself. And I'm the center of my decisions.
Do you think that it's a little bit more difficult these days to make decisions than it was, let's say, before 1989?
Well, it depends on what type of decisions you're talking about, yes, because I think partially yes, because I don't want to sound too bold, but I think that time, you had certain, you can say clear choices that could be made, politically, either you are against, the communist regime or not, for example, and that was a bold idea that was engaging a lot of, especially young people, to actually act, against, especially in kind of, 80s and just before the changes. And also just after that, when the system has changed and those new opportunities kind of open up, it was much easier in that sense for young people to just, take the opportunity and, go with whatever it was, business career or whatever, education and so on and so on. Obviously, making some of those choices, especially the political ones against communists, was actually a very difficult choice because that was linked with the personal risks, yes? So in that sense, it was sometimes scary and really required a lot of courage. But at least you have some of those either big opportunities or bold ideas that were engaging and driving people. And I have a feeling that currently, especially for younger people, you don't have those very simple and clear options that you can subscribe to. Yes, I mean, whether it's political idea or some other. Yes, it's in that sense you have much more opportunities. The freedom of choice is much bigger. But actually, because of that, I guess for many people they're a bit more lost in terms of what is really this, the things that are engaging and driving. Sometimes they're trying different things, and trying a lot of things in the end, nothing. So I don't know whether it's answering wrong answer to your question.
I was just intrigued because I think it was Václav Havel who said, and that is actually an embodiment of that difficult choice that you just described, whether to go against the regime, and if so, what exactly are you willing to sacrifice? And he said, as the 1990s with the wild capitalism and all of those changes were just going by, he said young people today are actually suffering from carrying too much of a burden of freedom. There's so much variety around and so little guidance because the structures are so much more fluid that it's taking on a lot of responsibility because you have to find that choice within yourself, but who to look to, who to consult. I mean, you said that you consulted some of your choices with people around you, but in the end, it's all up to you, isn't it?
Probably this kind of fluidity of choices, or like this thing is very kind of heavy burden, and especially because you kind of have the expectation, like there is this generational kind of struggle that my parents grew up in a much more kind of calculable, more secure world in a sense. So it was much less welfare and much less kind of freedom, but it was much more secure, and they could calculate for longer periods of time. So there is this kind of, for me, I mean, I was born in just in February 1990, so it's just like a few months of kind of fresh Romanian democracy, just like 1 month after Ceausescu was killed. So kind of like I all the time have this kind of question. So what do you want to do with your life? So there is this expectation that you have to make one big choice that kind of decides a lot of things, and I don't think that you can do that. In a sense, I find it cruel that for example, when somebody goes to university, like 17, 18-year-olds, you cannot expect from a 17, 18-year-old girl or boy to just like decide something. But there is this expectation from parents, but from like the kind of the institutions. Like for example, in Hungary, you get a finite number of subsidized semesters. So 6 semesters you can get state subsidy. After that you have to pay the kind of the tuition fee, which is huge. So it's like a 17, 18-year-old person decides that, okay, so now I'm starting this track at the university. I use up my free semesters, and then I'm stuck with something which I realize after 2 years that I just like have no opportunities. I hate it. I don't know. So there are a lot of possibilities that could go wrong. And after that, you have, in lucky case, you have a diploma that you don't kind of like.
You're a good example, or you are, that this is no longer necessarily the case. You know, you were an auditor and you're a tech entrepreneur now, and you made that choice, you know, kind of mid-career. So I don't think we are, there's the downside and there's the upside. There's the kind of going from black and white to 150,000 shades of gray now, and it's confusing, yes. But it also means that if you made a choice at 17, 18, 19 or so, and then it turns out that you don't like the consequences, you can make another choice. You know, there's always two sides to the coin.
Imagine you're that 17, 8-year-old and you do feel trapped. I mean, you can't dictate a person how to feel. And especially if you're faced with difficult circumstances, your family needs support. You found yourself after 2 years stuck with something that you don't even like, and you don't have a mentor. I mean, we talked about the lack of role models. Mentorship, I think that's a tremendously important concept that has been sort of vulgarized as just as pretty much anything that comes out of the US, and we can't find a proper way, linguistically even, to express it in our different languages. Let's say leadership or mentorship. Do you have words for those in your own language that don't sound slightly awkward? At least in my language it's a problem.
Very awkward, yeah.
But yes, you don't have a mentor, you don't have someone to look up to. Maybe you do feel trapped, maybe you do not know what to do, and how do you get yourself unstuck when you're there?
How did you get unstuck when you made your big choice?
I spent 10 years abroad. I left the country when I was 18 years old. And I was living across Europe, then I moved even further away to the United States. And a year ago, almost a year, I decided to come back to my home country and to try working for the government. I mean, by training, I'm a political scientist. I've done many different things. I've been a journalist. I've worked in development, and now I'm here, part of the establishment. And
what was the reason for the change?
sorry?
What was the reason for coming back?
Well, when you were talking about the feeling or your drive to write, you were talking about passion. So I would like to talk about impact because that's what I was lacking. I didn't necessarily dislike or feel stuck with what I was doing. The environment I was in yet made me feel as if I was this very, very small little wheel in a huge machine that was basically running no matter what I did, completely replaceable. And I thought, well, if I'm sort of drawn to public service, I want to sort of contribute to the public good, maybe I should start where I came from. And maybe in a smaller country, and smaller countries can often be incubators for bold ideas and initiatives. If you come at the right moment, the right constellation of driven people ready to work together, it can happen. So I wanted to test that theory, and that's why I'm back.
But that was that rational analysis saying that yes, I want to have an impact. Okay, you know, I may have a bigger impact as a bigger wheel in the structure in going to a smaller country, obviously, because then the leverage is potentially easier. Or was there also, you know, emotions linked to the fact that you are coming to your home country and, you know, whatever, some sort of a patriotism linked to that after 10 years of being abroad?
I wish I could say that. Maybe that depends on personality. I am fortunate or unfortunate in the way that I adapt to different environments. I mean, it doesn't take much for me to enter a new space and feel at home. So I see myself as a person who's had many homes in my hitherto life. And I wanted to reconnect to my home as well, maybe go back to my roots, because maybe over time it was becoming difficult for me to see what those roots actually were. And another additional reason, there's always something personal behind it, isn't it? Is family. So when we were just starting out this conversation, we were saying that we're two different generations. Well, I have a third generation person that I really care about. That is my sister. She's just turning 15 this year. And I felt like I really wanted to take part in her upbringing, maybe be a positive role model to the extent that I can. A role model not being anyone perfect to emulate, but just a flawed person who may be of inspiration and sort of lend an ear or a shoulder to cry on when it's needed. So, and that's been probably one of the most rewarding experiences of being back to Slovakia so far.
So there's also this emotional part, not only that rational
Absolutely,
part.
absolutely.
I see. Gets to the blood of the.
It's not only men who make emotional decisions.
I know, but just trying to look for those, not only those rational ones.
Yeah, my emotional part is when I was in the decision-making process, I was thinking, okay, so if I want to do something with my kids, would they be rather do auditing, or would they be rather taking care of like 3D modeling of dinosaurs? So the answer is simple.
It's a no-brainer.
It's just, but the point was to be more, inspirational as a father to them, like as a role model.
Yeah, and they can do it as
the-
well, and they can learn because it's fun, and they can tell to their friends, okay, look, I have like 3D dinosaurs here. It's more fun,
Definitely.
and they enjoy it.
How old are your kids?
2, 7, 9.
Beautiful.
Sillard, what did you bring to share with us?
Yes, well, I also brought something kind of literature related, different medium.
The generation difference.
It's just to kind of sharpen the generational,
This is turning out to be deeply intellectual.
the generational divide. Yes, so, well, actually, the story behind this is like it's a very common kind of like last 4 like verses of one poem, of a Hungarian poem. And why I brought it and what's the story behind it is that my grandmother was a literature teacher, and kind of like I grew up in this very literaturized environment, but not in the sense that I had to read that much or some, of course, everybody, but kind of like having this correspondence to reality all the time, and I felt like this kind of living in those situations and kind of always relating how I lived or what I did in terms of kind of like a character or like a poem or something like that. So when I moved to Budapest, one of the reasons, like moved from Romania to Budapest, one of the big reasons was to kind of like live geographically in some of my favorite poems. So like walk right there where that was written, or where the action takes place, or something like that. So actually, there is this kind of tragic Hungarian poet Attila József, who was kind of in the writing in the 20s and 30s, and he was kind of he's still kind of a very huge role model for a lot of kind of left-leaning young people, and he has a statue at the Danube next to the parliament, sitting on the bank of the Danube and just contemplating there, because he has one poem which is called By the Danube, and this kind of this contemplation stuff. And I choose the last 4 kind of verses because of the kind of the environment we are in this like Mittel Europa kind of environment, and there is this really nice part, so I'm going to quote it. Out of the blood of our fathers sheds battles, flows peace. So out of the blood our fathers shed in battles flows peace through our remembrance and regard, creating order in uncommon matters. This is our destiny, and it will be hard. This is basically this kind of metaphor of the Danube, having to kind of remember and kind of do together, or do away with the conflicts of the past, with all the kind of within nations and among nations in this area, and it's how this is our mission. It was his mission in the 20s, and I think it's still our missions in nowadays. Yeah. So When we make choices, there is this kind of, there should be some idea what you want, you imagine the ideal life or what you want to achieve. And for me, it's just like this kind of very mundane happiness. It's kind of like this feeling of good, feeling comfortable, feeling at home, having this kind of embeddedness with people, having a lot of, so probably it's also because I'm just outrageously young yet, but I have this very hedonistic kind of, and this was one reason, and also because I felt that growing up in a kind of, and we can talk about this later, so, but growing up in this kind of ethnic minority environment is just really pressing and pushing down and limiting all the possibilities you want to make. It's like putting on a track.
Because of stigma, or?
Not just because of stigma, it's not just the outside. Actually, I had never experienced, actually on my skin, I never had any bad experience, and I lived in Bucharest for a while, so I was like, at the university, at my BA, I was this only Hungarian-speaking person in the entire cohorts. But it's more like, I don't know how, it's more like the group itself, so the minority group itself expects of you to behave in a certain way and to put this mission on you to kind of...
You sometimes create your own ghetto in a sense, yes? Because sometimes obviously it's forced, but sometimes actually those minorities,
I think that's the,
in terms of
the
preserving
right
their own integrity, somehow are closing, themselves.
I mean, it's always easier to define the self against an other, right? If you have to just define the self by looking inward, that requires very deep thought process that not a lot of people want to go through. And it's so much easier to just pitch yourself against someone, pitch yourself against a community as a nation, pitch yourself against another nation. We have so many phobias in this region. It's so completely understandable. I mean, this is a community that there's a historian called Timothy Snyder, who's a Yale historian who studied this region extensively. Maybe some of you know him. And he calls this part of the world bloodlands. Have you read the book? It's fantastic.
Do you feel like an outsider in Budapest?
No, I
Because-
don't feel it.
Yeah, because that already is a bigger melting pot, and there's more different
And
lines.
I also felt the same in Bucharest, because that was also kind of a cosmopolitan, kind of more diverse place. But there are these kind of very mundane, everyday kind of expectations that that limit you. So you don't have to imagine this kind of stigma that you are somehow and you are excluded and discriminated against. But it's just like this very, very like, I don't know, goodwill, benevolent expectations of you that kind of like, if you want to do, let's say, politics, you can do just, everybody expects that probably you want to do that kind of ethnic politics, or if you want to do research, probably you should do that kind of research. Or these things that kind of you get defined by your ethnic otherness, your origin. So that was very liberating when I moved to Budapest, that I wasn't kind of I was the normal kind of in the terms of like everybody is the same, so you are not defined by the fact that you are Hungarian. You could do, you could be something else. You could be, I don't know, working class person, or you could be, I don't know, defined by, let's say, sexual orientation, or a lot of other things that kind of.
And you believe that you are doing now different things that you would do staying in Bucharest or in Romania in general? Yes. The choices have been different.
Much different.
Expectations, huh?
Yeah.
And
That's a big one.
You also mentioned this kind of you already internalize how others think about you, and you have to decide to just rip off that kind of web of expectations and put yourself in.
Yeah, I think for me it was, I'm kind of a rational person as well, so maybe I was filling my kind of Maslow pyramids of values. So once I get to certain point, when in Czech or Czechoslovak we have kind of saying that you as a man, you have to build a house, plant a tree, and
the same.
born
Father a
son.
child, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I'm done with those.
Yeah, good.
So
Those goals.
What else can
So
you
now
do now?
it's out of the way.
So my burden is done, and now I can make something more.
Yeah, but it's true, I guess, that actually making a choice is a bit about managing or escaping from the trap of expectations of others. Yes, because frequently you do things that not only are really what you believe are right, but what you believe is expected, or what your family, parents, colleagues, whatever type of could be a ethnical setup, is actually expecting from you. Yes, this is the right choice, right career. That's a good. You have to do it because it's good for your family, whatever. And I think sometimes making the choice actually means that you have to confront those expectations, which is even more difficult because it's additional constraint that you have to struggle with and cope. Yes.
Do you see any emerging guidance, whether it's mentoring or different sets of values or ideals that help us make these choices? Because I guess that's our generations. Yeah, that's at the end of the whether it's generation X, Y, Z, etc. At the end of the 20th century, the world got way more complex, way more opportunity, more risks, less security, and that can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on the setting and how you think about it and your mindset. But that also means a lot less guidance, and we need to be more introspective. And do you see anything that is emerging in terms of values, in terms of guidance, in terms of systems, institutions that help us make these choices?
But I think I'm a bit skeptical and critical. I believe that we actually are missing, really kind of big and engaging ideas that would drive people, young people. And I think Central Europe is very quickly actually adjusting and kind of aligning with Western Europe in that sense. That I think we are missing the strong idea. I mean, historically, for years and ages was either religion, then it was liberalism and kind of this justice, freedom, and brotherhood. But I think those big ideas are somehow evaporating, and there is some sort of a vacuum. And probably that's, for example, one of the reasons why those extreme kind of ideas like nationalism kind of or religious kind of fanatism is actually regaining its attractiveness, because these are the ideas that are very simple, straightforward, explaining the world, helping to actually manage through this life of multiple choices, and sometimes people do not perceive choice as an opportunity but rather as a threat. Yes, so that's why those ideas are becoming so popular.
I think that we are
Do you
missing
agree?
role modeling, and I like this word, like role model. But we are missing this on both levels, like on personal level, that I do not perceive, or I don't know, like the role models which I would clearly out of my head just put on the table. And as well on the national perspective, because we were looking as a CE, we were looking to the Western countries as kind of role models. And at the end we found out, okay, they have their own problem as well, and it doesn't work as well.
Not so
and
different,
then
better.
At the end you find out that the biggest corrupted cases which we have in our republic came from UK and from Sweden, which are supposed to be like kind of cleanest countries. And so there's disappointment on those levels as well.
Yeah, I don't know, I have to disagree with this need for big ideas. Yes, just be the
With the
contrary.
need or with the...
With the need for kind of like the need of these big ideas. I don't know, I mean, just like I think that in terms of choice making, what we lack more is this kind of empathy and solidarity kind of stuff, which is not like, it's not this kind of big goals there,
Yeah, big ideals.
but it's just like it's kind of this it's not a goal, it's just a method of doing decisions, and that's what I think we need, not the goals for the decisions, for the choices, but kind of the method to change, to be like more this kind of, when we make our individual choices, to be much more aware of of the others around us and to make kind of choices with empathy and stuff like that. And also, like, I have a really good friend, a sociologist from Holland, and she made a research on activists, on like this kind of progressive activists who, in her country, who want to change the country to make it more equal, more inclusive, a better place. And she found out that actually none of them have this kind of big ideas. They are just this kind of very, in a sense, nihilistic and non-believing, skeptical people who just kind of work on this very hedonistic level. And so I found it's very interesting how the people who actually want to do the most for its kind of a better world are actually the ones who don't have these very ideas. And I have this experience in kind of like in the personal circle, in my personal circles, as I work a lot in kind of this political activism in Budapest and kind of these new left groups. And I see the same kind of tension that the people who want to do the most for kind of the Hungarian society to become better and freer and more equal are also the people who don't have this kind of big idea.
Big ideas, especially when they're skillfully sort of grasped and conceptualized, produce very little sometimes other than catchphrases that just media pick up on, or they become sort of its discursive framework for a relationship.
But then
The Cold War,
idea.
the transition paradigm, liberal democracy. I mean, I think part of the reason why we feel such urge for big ideas, because we grew up in an era of big ideas, and we had role models, we had ideal types that we thought we were emulating until we found out that they're actually as flawed as we are, and sometimes even more so in sort of respective issue areas. So is it something that we were just socialized to do? I mean, is it actually useful in the end, as you're saying? I mean, because big ideas, it still evokes a very top-down approach for me. So who should they come from? From the leaders. Then who are the leaders? Who are the people behind the leaders? Because we have great leaders who have popular appeal, but let's put it this way, don't have the time, the energy to conceptualize that well. So we have speechwriters, we have advisors, we have a team of people that come up with the big ideas, then are expressed through the voice of a leader that is recognized, that is respected. So where do these big ideas actually come from?
No, but I think
Maybe the
big
small
idea-
ideas matter just
Yeah,
as much.
but definitely big idea is not a big idea if it's limited only to small group of people, intellectualists and so on. Yes, then I think big idea is the idea that's really driving massive change. And I mean, I agree with what you're saying that lots of interesting things are being done by people on the very low level. I mean, kind of, and they are very exciting. But I think that the issue is those ideas that it's difficult to translate those ideas into changes that are really influencing the whole, society. Yes? I mean, it's like those kind of town activists and things like this, but they are still kind of on the nucleus kind of small level. And I think the big ideas. That was the idea that turned out not to be a very successful and good, yes, but the Marxism and kind of communism in a sense, yes, it was like, outstanding idea, yes, in 19th century, suddenly really inspiring people because, really challenging the world at that time, offering completely different opportunities, and that's why it was exciting, yes, it was actually the idea developed by not the leaders, not the politicians and so on, some people that was picked up later, obviously was, used in a terrible way, but that was type of an idea that was inspiring change. The same like the liberalism or Adam Smith and his free economy idea, which was in the end a textbook. But
maybe something slightly less macro. I can give you an example of what I think was a great grand idea. And that was just this one phrase: Europe whole, free, and at peace. This inspired nearly 2 decades of integration. In this region. I mean, maybe in part thanks to that overarching idea that was sort of an umbrella for a lot of initiatives. We are now in the EU, NATO has expanded, we're whole, free, and in peace. I mean, now we can start asking ourselves the question, what is Europe and where does it end? Who else do we admit to the clubs or not? But this was
No, exactly. It was a, it
I
was
agree.
a powerful idea in that sense. It
But
actually
do you
made a
feel the
change.
lack of such an idea right now?
Now, yes.
Is there anything that can guide us in making our choices that can be helpful? Mentors you mentioned. Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to go back there because I'm just wondering if anyone here has had a similar experience. But for me, it has been very hard to find one or two or three. But it has been much simpler making choices, not because they tell me to do something, not because they explain what my choices are, and then I have a sort of multiple choice in front of me, and it's either A or B or C, and then it's up to me to pick. So they don't function as filters, or they don't function as people that I can delegate decisions to.
More like
I don't quite
wisdom
know.
catalysts.
But we're
Wisdom
missing,
catalysts.
missing such a mentor or
No,
or
no,
kind
I
of, or
actually
you had?
have them, but I've missed them for a long time. And ever since I found people that I can genuinely call mentors, I've been much more comfortable, especially in my professional life, with making decisions, small and big. So.
Do you have a similar experience? Or?
I don't know, mentorship for me is just like a nasty business. I mean, it's like very, very undemocratic. It's like there is this power relation which at the end ends up with killing the killing the mentor, kind of like, so it's like in some kind of like, there is the mentor who is kind of directing you, and at a certain point you reach the level when
That's
you have
exactly
to depart.
what I was
and just
trying to
like,
say, that it's not like that. But maybe you have a different
so
experience.
that's how I imagine mentorship. So for me, it's kind of like it's much. I think it's much more important. It's more equal kind of the discussion and debate kind of format, which was for me in terms of choices and in terms of thinking about my life or other things. It's very important to just like sit down with more people and in a terms of like a very informal setting, just chat about. And you don't need actually the input of like, oh, do this or do that. Just like by talking and by kind of arguing, debating, like getting even to a fight about something, you clarify things about yourselves. And I think most of my decisions were somehow in this manner of like, not having a very previously set choice and stuff like that, but through debate it was articulated, and I realized.
I mean, I experienced it from both ways, like being mentor and receiving
Mentee,
mentoring as
yeah.
well. Yeah. But I agree with you. Like I'm on that way that for me the best one solving the problems is to go to the pub with my friends and have a coffee or beer. And
Especially especially that I believe that when you make a profound change, really, which is not just a decision whether I'm going to work for that company or for another company, and so on. It is typically linked with not only the rational choice, but also it has the strong influence on your kind of personality, emotions, and things like that. Because sometimes you're leaving behind you something that whatever you will be doing for a long time, for example, and that has a certain emotional, not only burden, but different type of emotions. And I think in that case, I'm not sure whether it's a mentor, in even that sense that you describe, is the most important person, or to what extent it is more you're looking for a. I'm just saying that typically you don't make these decisions completely in vacuum. Yes, even if we are saying that you want to go away from constraints of expectations of others, in the end, these people around you are not only the constraints but also your help, support. Yes, whether it is your friends or your parents or your whatever fiancé or wife or husband. I think I think in making these big profound changes, it's also important to be able to relate to someone, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, few people that you can really discuss this type of a change on a different level. At least for me, when I was doing my changes, it was not just that I decided myself I'm going to stop working in business and now writing, and I don't care about my family and people around me and so on. Yes, I spent a lot of time consulting that, discussing with my wife, for example. Is it a good idea and how this is going to influence our life, and the lifestyle we used to have, and so on, the kids, and it was related to that. And probably not having these discussions with her not sure whether I would actually make all those decisions or not. Yes, it was somehow either reinforcing support. That my case, it was supporting actually in the end, actually making me more comfortable with the decision I made, and the risk that was related to that. So I think this type of very personal discussions are, I believe, very important, especially if you make really kind of this big personal change.
So what did you bring us? And how does that relate to the choice that you made? Leaving the country, studying abroad, working abroad, and then choosing to come back?
It's actually a quote, and we did mention the person with whom the quote originates yesterday, U.S. Vice President Joe Biden at the time.
That's interesting drama.
And you can relate this to the region that we come from, and we can relate it to ourselves or try to. But in 2008 in Bucharest, he said to our nations, Central European nations, it's your time to lead.
I'm pretty positive about that it's not his interpretation, but mine would be kind of like, it's time to get over, and it's not just for our region, but basically the whole world outside of the kind of the core countries of Euro Americas. It's kind of, it's time to, I mean, we've been chasing all these kind of ideas of getting like them, and all these kind of attempts to catch up, because it was like the whole modern history of the world is kind of attempts to catch up with some kind of Western idea should be over, and we should find kind of like the models that make actually our societies better in terms of not this catching up or copying models, but of,
Although I would be very skeptical whether this was really something that he had in mind.
Yeah,
I agree.
I'm sure
Or the
that he did
speechwriter.
not have this in mind.
Somehow I'm very skeptical of this type of speeches,
It's
that
more-
whether they are really...
I would say that if it was
Yeah.
2008, it means 20 years after the revolution, more or less. So if you take it to the age of the person at the age of 20, then okay, so you are grown up, so now make your decision.
When something can't be done, or you have a difficult task ahead of you as a government, sometimes this wonderful thing comes up and you say, we're just a small country, what can we do? This small nation complex, the weak state complex. Look at small nations such as Finland or Denmark, or is Sweden that big? Austria.
It's interesting what you said on complaining, because I thought that this was more, a Polish kind of like challenge of living by complaining, but in fact it is not. Yes, I don't know whether it's the same in Hungary or.
It is very the same, and I think the Eastern European, Central European is that the phenomenon is that everybody thinks that it's only them who are bad or who are good.
Yeah, exactly.
But actually everybody.
Apparently.
But what you just said on the national level, I think it trickles down through all levels of society, down to the individual, and with it comes a certain attitude of victimization. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
The kind of, which is it's very similar in Austria. Same thing. Yeah, small country and everybody complaining and this and that. Yeah, so I think there's a certain cultural element to it. But as you said, I think it resonates with everybody who's here in the region. I'm sure if we ask people from the Balkan countries, they would also agree. Yeah.
Or it can also be this frustration of impotence in a sense, because, or that's kind of
A perceived impotence.
perceived impotence, yes. Or objective, I mean, of like this is being constrained and then like limited in your freedom. It can also be that. I mean,
But that's true, because that's something that's actually blocking lots of people coming back to the personal level from making the choice, yes, because you have exactly this inertia or this belief that you cannot change your life because, and there's always a logical list of reasons why you cannot change it. It's either because of financial constraints or your family or whatever expectations or something.
Or the
something.
state.
Yeah.
The state is always involved.
Exactly. The state is doing something. They should do it differently, and why they don't do it? It's always they who are guilty, not
yes,
us,
but
not myself.
I wouldn't be so skeptical about these claims that actually people when I was in high school, I had this very kind of self-pity attitude for a long time, and I was just like beaten out of it by a friend, like kind of really not physically, but it's like it was a very aggressive process of getting rid of self-pity. And the attitude, kind of my friend's attitude against self-pity was that it limits your action and you are just complaining all the time, but instead you should act and everything. And she was right, but sometimes we kind of overlook the fact that when people complain, actually they might be complaining because of a reason. It's like we should at a certain point start thinking about the fact that people are complaining because they have legitimate and really good reasons to complain. And sometimes it's really the state or the economy's fault that they are in a position of impotence.
I would say that what you said, that people are complaining, that I see the difference that it used to be that people were just complaining, and now people are complaining, but they are actually doing something. And it's kind of like generational change. And I see it like that there is I like those, you call it town activism or town activists. I actually do like them because they do actually something, and there is some work which you can see behind them. And one like those small spots, they will get together sooner or later, and it will emerge into something bigger.
I'm not saying it's all black, but at the same time, perhaps sort of more appreciation for the good things that we actually have, or the achievements that we have behind us. Because each story has two sides, right? You can be a small country that is not very empowered to act as a leader on the world stage. At the same time, you're a small country that pulled itself up in an admirable way. And I don't want to advertise my country over here, but it's quite impressive over the last 20 years what this country has gone through, what it has accomplished. So, maybe that's where big ideas come back in. And it's how you frame your own stories actually can be a very powerful device for you to empower yourself.
I really do like the movement which is now in Brno, the place I live. We call themselves Žít Brno, which means like to live Brno, to experience Brno. And it started as a joke, and it will transform into kind of political movement, and people really do like it. And if this kind of stuff will emerge, it will bring big change and positive change so far, as I can see.
We discussed a number of topics, obviously choices that you made, and thanks for sharing your personal perspectives and your biographies. How should we sum it up?
If you really have a strong, desire, drive, and passion about something, then this is really a sign that you should change. Something else, yes, that you should change and take the risk, and really be willing to take the risk, and whether it's a financial risk or personal, kind of career-wise. I also understand people that are not making these decisions because they are, so much constrained with reality, and do not have certain level of comfort. You need a certain level of comfort to be able to make a major shift. That's what I'm trying to say.
So choice is a privilege. It's
I think so.
Sometimes rooted in your own mindset, but also in the circumstances that you're growing up. And so if you have the ability to make choices, that's a privilege. We should
exactly. And then you should actually take advantage. And I think then if you don't do the change, somehow it's like, you're not. It's almost like you are guilty. Versus all the others that don't have this privilege, yes?
You almost have a moral imperative, a moral duty to,
find the right
follow your
English
passion
words.
and make the choices
I
that...
would say so, even.
Yeah. So you should be acting as a role model then.
That I'm not so sure I'm right.
I second that.
I like the fact that everything what we discussed here was at the end that the choices or whatever decisions we have or ideas we have were not driven by our nationalities, but by our personalities. I think that's important because we were taken here, each from every country, and it maybe sounds odd, but basically you wouldn't spot the nationalities unless we will be labeled somehow who's who.
Choice is a privilege, and that kind of we also we also kind of, everybody kind of has a responsibility to wield those choices in a direction that is kind of trying to help others also, and kind of like make choices with empathy and solidarity as the guiding principle.
And every choice you make, I think, and we've said it multiple times during this conversation, affects the choices of others around you that are watching you. They may consider you to be a role model of sorts, as an example. So just be conscious that those choices that you make because of passion, because you want to have impact, because you want to change your life situation, affect other people. So just make them in a conscious way. Just be aware at all times. I think part of the privilege, we're all speaking from the privileged position of having had the opportunity to choose. With that comes a level of awareness that we employ when we make our choices. I would just hope that more and more of us will have that level of awareness when they're making decisions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.